Our question today comes from Joseph, who's been dating his girlfriend for 6 months. Joseph tells us that he's only been with partners who are into BDSM, but his girlfriend is a virgin. Joseph is feeling anxious about revealing his kinky side. He describes his girlfriend as super sweet, smart, and beautiful, and he worries about what she'll think if he tells her he wants to have kinky sex. He's afraid that his girlfriend might freak out and leave him. Despite all of this, he's honestly okay with being more on the Valino side if it means that he can still have her in his life because he loves her.
Yeah, it's not going to end well for you, Joseph. The thing is this. It sounds like he's gone pretty deeply into kink in previous relationships. He is confident that this is a part of his sexuality and who he is as a person. And it is not quite so easy as all that to just delete parts of yourself. One interesting framing that I've raised in the book is I make the argument that love is a kink. What seems to be happening here is that he has never had that kink fulfilled, or maybe has not had that kink fulfilled quite so much. And so he is feeling an extreme level of satisfaction of that one kink, maybe the way that so many of us experience satisfaction of kink the first time we are traditionally kinky is, oh, wow, that's what I've been missing. I think he is likely experiencing that with the kink of love and thinks by the immediate comparison that he will be able to be fine by ignoring the other kinks that he has. I would disagree. I suspect that once the kink of love has become more familiar, more naturalized into his life, all those other kinks will rear their heads again. And then there will be an issue of whether the girl is into those kinks and she has no earthly idea whether she's into those kinks. I think that that is one of the big challenges of somebody who has experience with kink and someone who doesn't, because one person knows themselves and the other one does not have that self-knowledge. It's a recipe for difficulty, I would say. Now, I think there's probably less difficulty in the degree of matchup between specific kinks. There is some difficulty there. But I think the biggest issue is just the amount of kinkiness, if such a thing were quantifiable. How far down the rabbit hole does your partner want to go? How kinky is she? Because that is more a measure of how intense of a life do you want to live. And that's a tricky thing to know, and you really can't expect, and it is specific to the domain of sex. There's some overlap, I think. People that tend to be more intense broadly also want an intense sex life, but it's not 100%. There are people who want a very intense life and don't care that much about sex, and vice versa. And she can't give him that information.
The sense I got from Joseph reading the question is, it reminds me of him having a Madonna-Whore Complex. He's found his Madonna. He's found this perfect girl that he has described as sweet, beautiful, what does he say? Super sweet, smart, and beautiful. And then contrasts this with his own sort of kinky side, right? And it's almost like, well, he maybe doesn't want to turn her into a whore, or maybe almost doesn't want to see her that way because she's the super sweet, smart, and beautiful person. Well, that's a Madonna, right? That's not a whore, right? And he's to some extent pedestalizing her. He's putting her on a pedestal and saying, well, look how beautiful and perfect you are. I would hate to besmirch your perfection by tying you up. Or, he's even said that he's into CNC, right? And this is a virgin that he's dating, much younger than him.
Sure.
So to go from someone who he thinks of as super sweet, smart, and beautiful, and go from who's a virgin, and go from that to, hey, I'm really into CNC, is a very big step to cross, right? In his mind, perhaps. Now, of course, that has to start off with conversations. I'm like, honey, I need to sit you down. There's things I need to tell you about myself. And, that could be a long process, and that's fine. Maybe she'll get to CNC or bondage and all the other things he's into, knowing that it's just going to take a long time, perhaps, right? As long as she's expressed openness to it. The other thing that I got from him is that there's a subliminal sense of shame or wrongness that he's expressing in his kinks. If he said, hey, honey, I really like the color red. I would really like you to wear more red from now on. That's just a preference I have. It's one of those things I just really enjoy seeing on a woman. There would be no sense of shame in bringing that up, right? It's been 6 months that they've been dating, right? 6 months is a long time to be dating somebody and not bring up the fact that you're kinky. And I can only imagine that he himself has not fully integrated his own shadow. He's not fully accepted it. He's also said that in the past, he's been with partners who themselves knew they were into BDSM. So he didn't have to have conversations in the past revealing himself. He very likely met these people on forums that were, kink adjacent or into BDSM adjacent. So all of that legwork was already done for him. He's never actually had to do legwork with somebody who was not kinky. Is that kind of the sense that I'm getting from him?
It's interesting. I don't know that I read it that way. Let's come back to that point afterward, because there's a ton to dive into on your first point there. First, the notion of the Madonna-Whore. As I talk about in the book, that's actually the Maiden archetype. So most rom-coms, most romance novels, most Disney movies are based around the Maiden archetype. It's very much for women what the hero archetype is for men. The reason that Iron Man and all the Marvel movies and Star Wars all appeal to men, and men will watch them over and over and over again, and the same reason that women will watch rom-coms over and over again is because they are telling these archetypal stories. That is an important factor, that both of them are playing into this archetype. The problem with that is that the Maiden archetype is an adolescent archetype, just as the hero archetype is an adolescent archetype for men. It tells the story of a boy becoming a man or a girl becoming a woman, and thus has universal appeal. That's why movies always tell these archetypes. It appeals to every single man, whereas a magician archetype story, it's only going to appeal to men who are adults and are working on or living that part of their archetype. Similarly, if you tell stories that are deeply about motherhood, your audience is more limited, and so you'll find less and less of that in Hollywood. The reason I'm going into this is that the Madonna and the whore are both the shadow forms of the Maiden archetype. And the fundamental transformation of the Maiden archetype, as the girl grows up, she is looking for a bigger world. Belle in Beauty and the Beast sings, there must be more than this provincial life. That's the exploration. The development of desire is the core developmental process. And so that also explains her virginity in some sense. She has not really developed her sexual desire as a person. That in itself indicates that archetypally, she is in a very early stage. She has not yet gotten in touch with her sense of desire. The problem is that it also applies to other things. Does she desire a man who is physically strong? Does she desire a man who is intelligent, who is funny or witty? What does she want? She doesn't know. I suspect that in these archetypal forms, these things tend to be global. She probably is a little out of touch with the notion of desire and desiring globally. And so once she moves into the goddess of love, what I call the next archetypal step for women, she has an explosion of desire. The shadow forms of the goddess of love are the seductress and the slut, or the cock tease and the slut. She will have an entire set of desires that she currently is out of touch with. Now, if they're married, by that point, there's going to be some serious issues. But unless they're extremely lucky and they just happen to match up, this is part of the problem of him maybe dating someone who is that out of touch. The other thing that it raises for me is, why is she a virgin? And okay, we don't know how old she is, right?
Just to be clear, the question did say she was 22 years old.
Okay, so that's a bit young. Maybe she's a virgin, just she was raised fairly conservative. Maybe she's a bit shy. Maybe there are personality things there. It makes sense in some level that she is in the Maiden archetype era then, right? Our culture has become much more permissive sexually. She would be in college, right? The notion that a cute girl at 22 is a virgin, unless there's a significant cultural reason, is unlikely. It's unlikely to have happened by accident because the culture is promoting a different path. And so what are her attitudes towards sex? Is she actually going to embrace a healthy and fulfilled sexuality? And is she going to have a high libido and be interested in kinky sex And again, it's not about particular kinks, even love as a kink, right? Even within just the kink of love, I want intense sex. I want sex, missionary, in the dark, with the lights off, kissing, but I want it to be intense and deep and meaningful, not a girl who's starfished out, just not participating, like basically being a fleshlight as I masturbate into her cunt. That's not what I want. And that's a problem, because even if he can even give up all these other kinks, I suspect that within the kink of love, he still wants an intensity. And it's unclear that her cultural overlay will allow her to integrate that shadow and actually participate in that if she's gotten to this point, still a virgin, still unsure, still unclear. By contrast, he needs to have this conversation. There are a decent number of virgins at 22 who are all over literotica and reading all kinds of kinky erotic novels and smut, and are looking forward eagerly to actually having kinky sex, and just haven't found a partner that they trust that much. That's another contingent of people, and he doesn't know because he hasn't had the balls to open up that conversation, which I would say, leading into your second point, indicates some degree of non-integration. If you're looking to be the dom here, why have you gone 6 months without being who you are, right? Without saying, at least, let me lead the conversation here, right? Not that you have to do it, not that you have to do any of the kinky things, but having the balls to just say, hey, this is what I like sexually, this is what I've done in the past. How do those things strike you? When we do have sex, what is that going to look like? What is that going to be like to you? How important is it to you? It's an extremely odd scenario to have been dating someone for 6 months, claiming to be a dom, and not having the masculinity, the dominance, to have a frank conversation about what you will want in a relationship going forward. I think he's a little bit caught up in an infatuation here. The other thing I wanted to point out is that Jung talks about this, and he uses the term the animus and anima. He claims that in our collective unconscious, beneath the shadow, we have a conception of the idealized archetypal female. When we are captured by that anima, we project it onto another person, and we don't actually see her. We see an idealized version of our archetypal ideal woman for as long as we can, until she does something to break that illusion by being an actual human being with her own desires and needs and personality. And then that illusion crumbles, and we feel a sense of grief and loss and sadness. And if we are immature, as it kind of sounds that Joseph is here a little bit, we will then blame the other person for breaking that illusion, rather than blaming ourselves for projecting it in the first place. I suspect she is not the ideal woman. No one is. But he's projecting that, and he will be disappointed when that breaks, which he thinks he wants, but probably is not actually ready for. And that's going to create some dissonance.